As Jim Cornette once said, Shawn Michaels is 0 for life in real-life fights. He couldn't whip cream with an outboard motor, let alone anybody in fair one-on-one fisticuffs. My name's James, and this is ListMania Wrestling's attempt to document every single real-life fight that Shawn Michaels found himself in during his WWE tenure. So aside from all these skirmishes on this list, Shawn Michaels managed to find himself almost getting beaten up from everybody, from The Undertaker to Hurricane Helms. Triple H got him Michaels' drooping, drugged-up face backstage at the same WWF Raw episode where Vince McMahon bought WCW. The Undertaker threatened to beat up Shawn if he didn't drop the WWF title to Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. Mark Henry wanted to kill Shawn Michaels when Henry was getting mercilessly ribbed in his early WWE days. Stevie Richards was sick of getting humiliated by Shawn, and even Bullet Bob Armstrong thought about smacking Shawn during Michaels' lone appearance with Smoky Mountain Wrestling all the way back in 1995. But they are the almost, the near-fights, the what-ifs. The following are actual physical confrontations Shawn Michaels got involved in, pretty much instigated by himself if we're all being honest here, and how badly he fared in all of them. Marty Jannetty vs. Shawn Michaels 1, The Hotel Bar. For a bit of context, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were a popular tag team throughout the latter half of the 1980s to the early 1990s. They were originally called the Midnight Rockers, and then it was shortened to just The Rockers upon their debut in Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. Shawn and Marty had a contentious relationship with each other through the years, but tensions escalated when it became clear that the tag team run was coming to an end. The following story actually comes from Shawn Michaels' book, Hearkbreak and Triumph, so since this is the only source, I shall read directly from it. In May 1991, Marty and I were in a Denver hotel room getting smashed with Roddy Piper. Right in front of Marty, Piper started talking about how I had a great future in the business and that I had all this talent. The next thing I knew, Marty was challenging me to a fight. I told him I wasn't going to fight him, but he hit me anyway. I told him again, I don't want to fight you. He hit me again and then charged at me hard. I had to defend myself, and we scrapped for a bit before Piper eventually pulled us apart. I passed out right after the fight and woke up the next day with a big shiner. I was mad now and wanted to fight him. I went looking for him, but he had already left for Phoenix, where we had a show the next day. When I arrived in Phoenix later that day, I was still hot. I went straight to the hotel, I knocked on his door and yelled, "It's me, open up." Marty opened the door and then backed up. I had planned on rushing in and punching him, but he said he was sorry before I could. When we drank, we became stupid sometimes, and that was what happened. We talked about the whole commitment thing to each other and tried to patch up our differences. I think Marty was frustrated. He and I had never discussed breaking up and going single, but I think he began to sense that me going on my own was a real possibility. It came up a lot when I was around Piper and Teddy DiBiase. I would grill them for advice just like when I was 19 and in Mid-South. I don't think Marty liked that because I believe he was worried what would happen to him once we broke up. Turns out Marty was right to worry. He just wouldn't know how right he was until the day the Rockers officially broke up on television. Shawn Michaels vs. Marty Jannetty 2, The Locker Room Fight. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty probably had dozens of fights over the years, hard living, hard partying, and probably some incredibly untoward actions that have been alleged over the years as well, including by Marty. Anyway, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were coming to the end of the road as far as their on-screen and off-screen relationships were concerned. Both descending further into addiction, they started making rash decisions, like Marty calling up Vince McMahon to quit after receiving what he felt was a low payoff for a commercial endorsement. The problem was that in 1991, WCW was being helmed by Pizza Hut bigwig Jim Herd, and he wasn't handing out high-priced contracts, he was cutting them. Shawn and Vince McMahon basically conspired to split up the Rockers and have Shawn become the breakout star. Marty wasn't fully aware of this until the barbershop Double Cross Heard Around the World was filmed in front of a live studio audience. After Marty Jannetty attempted to escape from Shawn Michaels through the barbershop window,
glass window of the barbershop! Jannetty tried to dive through the window to escape.
Michaels headed to the locker room. After Marty was tended to for his fake injuries, he walked back through the gorilla position, that's the production area behind the curtain, only to be told by Vince McMahon that his services would no longer be needed with the WWF, at least for the foreseeable future. Marty in that moment saw the angle for what it was, Shawn turning heel and boosting his profile at Marty's expense before Marty being discarded. And that's where Shane Douglas picks up this story.
So he comes walking in, goes over to his bag, and Kurt's right across from him, both doing our thing, and several minutes later, boom, like hard, somebody comes slamming through the door. It's Marty. Marty comes, the door's over here to my left. Marty looks at me, looks at Kurt, looks at Shawn, and goes, "You mother," and starts across the room. And as he's going, I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? He's across the room, and he gets 4 or 5 feet from him, and Shawn goes, and just falls down. Like there's that lamb that, like, when it gets scared, it just falls over.
It's a goat.
Yeah. Just and he goes down and curls up in a ball, and Marty gets over there and he's like looking, and so he puts his hand against the whiteboard and smudges the thing later, because I saw the smudge, and he starts putting the boots to him. And I looked at Kurt and I went, should we stop it? Like, I've never seen this. I don't know what's good. Are they ribbing or what's going on? And Kurt looked at me and went,
Sir Mo, Israel, April 1994, and Men on a Mission. The late Bobby Horn, who wrestled in the WWF under the name of Mo, later to be knighted as Sir Mo, was one half of the babyface hip-hop inspired Men on a Mission tag team with his partner, the gargantuan 500-pound Mabel. Now, unsurprisingly for someone so enormous, Mabel suffered the occasional health problem. During a tour of Israel back in April 1994, Mabel was so sick he passed out in the hallway of the arena they were working that night in Tel Aviv. Unsurprisingly, randomly passing out backstage is nothing new in pro wrestling, but instead of taking Mabel to a hospital, WWF officials or whoever instead took him back to his hotel room to sleep it off. The Men on a Mission vs Headstringers bout for that night was scrubbed, and in its place was Mo vs Fatu, the future WWE Hall of Famer Rikishi. That whole situation didn't go over well with Rikishi, as the match was originally supposed to be Mo versus his tag team partner, Samu, and that's when it all started to hit the fan. While Fatu would eventually replace Samu in the match, Shawn Michaels decided to physically interject himself into the proceedings. All of a sudden acting the tough guy and grizzled pro wrestling veteran, most likely because all of his bigger, tougher friends were in the locker room with him at the time. Fresh out of the shower after wrestling one of his clique buddies, Razor Ramon, incidentally if you're interested, the Hearkbreak Kid decided to bully a lower level wrestler who couldn't fight back, lest they want to commit career suicide. Shawn Michaels comes out of the shower and he hit me in the back harder than I've ever been hit on the football field, quotes from Mo. He just knocked the hell out of me. The operative word from me was excuse me, and his response was fuck excuse me, you guys have no work ethic. Shawn Michaels, who himself was a drug addict at the time, proceeded to lay into Mo, who, as you might remember, was the guy who actually showed up to work and was ready to work, while Mabel was back at the hotel unwell. Quote, Shawn Michaels said, you young guys come up here with no f***ing work ethic and your f***ing partner fell down in the hallway. All he had to do was get his fat ass up and walk to the ring, and you do all the work and there will be a tag match tonight instead of this bullshit singles match. So Shawn Michaels, who used to pretend to suffer back injury so he could take the summer off from wrestling, was screaming at the wrestler who was healthy and willing to wrestle while his partner Mabel was sick back in the hotel. But it gets worse. Quote, my response was, being the man that I am, is that if you put your hands on me again, I'm gonna beat your f***ing ass. Well, that's all Shawn needed to hear to place a call to Vince McMahon, or however he informed him. As punishment, Mo ended up getting starved out. This is wrestling lingo for not firing a wrestler, but keeping them on the road and giving them the bare minimum of bookings so they make the least amount of money possible. Quebecer Pierre, now known as PCO, also received the starving treatment before Pierre up sticks and left the WWF a couple of months later. Mo, however, attempted to stick it out to no avail. Quote, did I pay for it? Yeah, dearly. What did it get me? It got me pulled off TV for 9 months and I had to travel on the road for 9 months and not work. Mo also said that the resulting depression led him to attempting to do himself in during this starvation period. In the interest of accuracy, Mo didn't wrestle for the WWF for 6 months straight rather than 9 months, while Mabel, the guy who was too sick to work, let's not forget, remained on the road, on TV, and even wrestled singles matches on pay-per-view. Then the next year, Men on a Mission turned heel and Mo got injured legitimately, leading to Mo basically becoming a manager who stood on the sidelines. By the time Mo started back in the ring, Mabel, who was injuring almost every wrestler he stepped in the ring with, was on the way out of the WWF, and with that, so was Mo. Mo remained in the business for decades but harboured resentment toward the WWF and Shawn Michaels for the rest of his life. The Harris brothers, enormous men, seriously tough dudes, identical twins as well. Now they tagged up in wrestling for years and had numerous names: the Grimm Twins, the Bruise Brothers, the Disciples of Apocalypse, Creative Control, the Hillbilly Mountain Men, the Blue Brothers, whatever they were called, who were managed by Dutch Mantel, and of course plain old Ron and Don. Now, they never got over in any of these guises in any company they worked for, but that's not the point here. They were popular guys backstage and had the respect of their peers. Well, most of them anyway. Let's get to the incident first. Madison Square Garden, October 6th, 1995. Ron and Don Harris heard that Shawn Michaels was talking bad about the twins, who, I stress, were both 6'5", covered in Third Reich tattoos, and basically looked like they could run any prison yard they found themselves in. Ron and Don cleared everybody out the locker room except for Shawn. Then Don wedged a chair under the handle so nobody could re-enter. While Don was on the lookout, Ron caught Shawn while he was exiting the shower. Ron then lifted Shawn up by the neck and then slammed him into the wall, before yelling, "You know what? I would beat the out of you, motherfucker, but you are such a piece of shit that you ain't worth my time." But only doing that after seeing Shawn actually start to cry. As a parting gift, Ron also gave Shawn a complimentary slap across the face for good measure. Once again, Ron and Don were just two men in a locker room full of dozens of huge dudes, but their reputations were such that they caused a stampede of 300-pound pro wrestlers scurrying for the exit. That and nobody liked Shawn anyway, so nobody would actually stick up for him. Once again, Michaels was by all accounts an incredibly obnoxious, self-absorbed drug addict who would have been fired years earlier had it not been for the fact that he was pretty much, or arguably at least, the best wrestler on the planet at that time. After Shawn started weeping, Ron laughed at him and then let him go, with Michaels sufficiently frightened for the Harris brothers' liking. Now as to why. According to the late Sid Vicious, Shawn Michaels was calling Ron and Don pussies and quitters for leaving the WWF overpay. Now, Shawn was actually getting paid well in 1995. He was actually one of the few people on the roster actually making decent money, but the other guys were living paycheck to paycheck because business was absolutely horrible back in the mid-1990s. Basically, an all-time low, $200 a night or even less. Many WWF wrestlers were making the bare minimum back then, and with workers having to pay their own road expenses such as hire cars and food and accommodation, some wrestlers were going into debt just to remain with the company. Michaels, however, was not one of those people, and apparently had no sympathy for the wrestlers who were getting cash advances on their payoffs just to pay the bills back home. Ron and Don had already given the WWF their notice over pay issues, and in response, Michaels loudly proclaimed to the locker room that the Harris brothers sucked as wrestlers and they wouldn't be missed. Ron and Don didn't take too kindly to Michaels' rhetoric, and now you know the rest of the story. Ron and Don finished up their commitments for the New York leg of the WWF tour and then departed the promotion the next week. Shawn Michaels' best friend and WWF champion at the time, Kevin Nash, was particularly bothered by the incident as he, Scott Hall, and Triple H were all touring Germany at the time and couldn't intervene. Kevin Nash has since claimed that he could have beaten up Ron and Don if they tried to get close to Shawn while in his presence. Sid Vicious disagreed, saying that Nash couldn't have taken either Harris brother, let alone both of them at the same time. In response to the Harris brothers and Shawn Michaels confrontation and the next fracas on this list, Kevin Nash told Vince McMahon not to book Michaels separately from the rest of the clique ever again. Syracuse. Okay, this is absolutely the most famous off-screen fight, probably not even in just Shawn Michaels' life, but perhaps all of wrestling history, especially considering the real-life and bizarrely positive implications it had for Shawn's career. The aftermath of the Syracuse beating saw Shawn give up his Intercontinental title, work a storyline where he came back too soon, and ended up getting concussed by Owen Hart, only to triumphantly return a couple of months later by winning the 1996 Royal Rumble match en route to defeating Bret Hart for the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 12. Now, here's the very much abridged version of the story. Exactly 1 week after Ron Harris jacked HBK up against the locker room wall in Madison Square Garden, Shawn Michaels, British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith, and Shawn 123 Kid Waltman were partying in Club 37 in Syracuse, New York. With the club soon closing, the trio of wrestlers quickly got sloppy on downers and alcohol, and then Shawn Michaels started cracking onto a young girl, hoping to hook up for the night. The girl's ex, Corporal Douglas Griffith of the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, took exception to Michaels flaunting his fame in order to impress said girl. Now, apart from being his own obnoxious self, Michaels hadn't actually really done anything wrong here. The women were paying attention to the wrestlers, and the guys were just getting jealous. With other patrons and the doorman sensing trouble was afoot, the slurring, stumbling WWF stars were ushered out of the club and into a fan's girlfriend's Pontiac Sunbird. British Bulldog and Kid were sat in the back, and a near comatose Michaels in the front. The jealous army guy followed them out and started calling the wrestlers a bunch of fakes. Bulldog, who was practically just as inebriated as the rest, if I can say that word, threw a weak punch from the back seat, followed by Shawn Michaels, who attempted likewise. With Davey Boy trapped in the back of the two-door car and Waltman in no state to fight back, Corporal Griffith seized his chance and slammed the car door onto Michaels' head before kicking the helpless WWF Intercontinental Champion while he was on the floor. Davey finally escaped the car but was restrained by two other army guy friends. Waltman also got out of the car and fell over, throwing his fake karate kicks. The bouncers eventually broke up the fight, with Shawn suffering a concussion, black eyes, a torn eyelid, other assorted cuts and bruises, and bleeding from his ears where his earrings had been ripped out. Bulldog suffered a black eye from getting an errant finger poke, and Waltman's pride was severely injured as well. When word got back to Vince McMahon, he was almost as angry that Shawn and Davey were hanging out together after just having wrestled each other as rivals earlier that night. Michaels had to vacate the WWF Intercontinental title to the heel Dean Douglas, who immediately then lost it to Shawn's click buddy Razor Ramon. Now, this happened for two reasons. Number one, if you have to switch up a match at the last minute, you better give the fans a happy ending. And two, Dean Douglas, better known as Shane Douglas, was despised by the clique, so there was no way he was going to get to keep any championship for that long. Corporal Douglas Griffith would be arrested and give his version of events, which differed wildly from Shawn Michaels' recollection, which was quite frankly near non-existent. Griffith essentially claimed self-defense, and he had numerous people backing up his story that lined up across the board. Shawn's version was that he had no idea what happened, and Davey and Waltman's stories didn't line up at all, and then the WWF went into damage control mode and claimed on television that Michaels had been beaten up by a dozen thugs in an unprovoked attack, rather than by one single man half his size. Of course, the WWF didn't also mention that Michaels' drug intake that night was probably a contributing factor in Shawn's inability to fight back as well. The WWF side were looking for Griffith to plead guilty, but when he didn't, Shawn and co probably realised that they were unlikely to get a conviction considering the false PR narrative they spun and everybody's inability to work out exactly what happened when. The prosecution dropped the case in May 1996 after Michaels declined to pursue the matter further. The Bret Hart hair pull scrap at WWF Raw on June 9th, 1997. Now, once again, this will require the abridged version, lest the entire Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels saga gets covered here in depth for the billionth time. Suffice to say, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels loathed each other by 1997 for myriad reasons, not least because a couple of weeks earlier on a WWF Raw is War episode, Shawn Michaels had intimated that Bret Hart had recently had some sunny days. This is significant a comment because Shawn, while pilled up of course, had gone on live television and hinted that Bret Hart was boffing WWF valet and personality Tammy Sytch, aka Sonny. This is ironic on several fronts. The very much married Bret Hart, according to his own autobiography, was banging pretty much every woman he could find while on the road, except Sonny, who they both insist nothing ever happened between the two. While Tammy's word is absolutely worthless as she's a born liar and serial manipulator and murderer, Bret Hart's integrity is pretty much absolute. The other thing was that Shawn Michaels was having a tickle with Sonny at the time, even though Tammy was in a long-term relationship with wrestler Chris Candido. Maybe there was some jealousy over what Shawn felt was Bret stirring his porridge. Who knows? Anyway, Bret didn't actually react to the sunny days comment immediately because he hadn't actually heard it. The sound quality wasn't the best in the arena and the crowd noise had basically drowned it out. When Bret Hart actually got to the back, Shawn Michaels was nowhere to be seen, and the hitman was then filled in as to what Shawn had actually implied. While Bret was still on the injured list after a recent knee surgery, he was still making television appearances, so there was some awkward locker room shared once or twice in the run-up to the eventual confrontation. Come that fateful day of the backstage fight on June 9th, Bret had been stewing over the public accusation for 2 weeks, especially because his wife had heard it and she was not too happy either. While Bret Hart was gelling his hair in a Hartford Civic Centre Arena bathroom, Michaels briefly yelled at him about giving him the silent treatment and then scarpered before Bret could get to him. Later, Bret confronted Shawn, wanting to know what his problem was, and Michaels threw a weak punch. Well, it was on, and Bret smacked him on the chin, and then the brief skirmish turned into Bret Hart grabbing Shawn Michaels by the hair and swinging him around in circles. When they were finally pried apart, Bret had clumps of Shawn's hair in his hands. Quote, "Don't f*** with me or my family, you little f***er," was Bret's parting words to Shawn. Shawn then marched right into Vince McMahon's office, clutching said clump of hair he picked up off the floor, and quit the WWF on the spot. Shawn Michaels' version of events has Bret Hart swinging the first punch, as well as some pushing and shoving before Michaels stuffed one of Bret's takedowns and they both went crashing through a piece of panelling. It was only then, supposedly, is when Bret opportunistically scalped Shawn while they were being separated. Either way, the result was the same. Michaels was legitimately gone from the company for a month. A real issue for the WWF because not only was he one of the headline attractions, he was a WWF Tag Team Champion at the time with Stone Cold Steve Austin. While Mick Foley would morph into his childhood persona Dude Love and take Michaels' place, Shawn tried everything he could to force Vince McMahon's hand into letting him go. Michaels even set up a photo shoot with an independent wrestling magazine wearing an official WCW t-shirt featuring his former Click brethren, the Outsiders, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, on the front. McMahon wasn't falling for the ruse and sent a stern legal notice to Michaels that not only was he not going to get paid, he was in breach of his contractual terms and the ramifications would be significant. Michaels eventually relented and returned to the company. As to Bret's state of mind at the time, at the same Raw as the sunny days comment was made on May 19th, Bret had been in conference with Vince McMahon. Vince had basically told Bret that his high-priced contract he'd signed back in the autumn of 1996 was not working for the company and that he may have to restructure his deal so he got paid on the back end. This was the first real motion toward what would end up being the Montreal Screwjob and Bret's ceremonious ousting from the World Wrestling Federation a few months down the road. Oh, and as to the fate of the hair, I hear you ask. Well, on-screen manager and off-screen WWF producer Jim Cornette picked the hair up off the floor of Vince's office. Then he shoved it in a bag and took it home to show his wife. And now the final fight on our list. The Rock at WWF SmackDown in 1999. As if there could be any other match to headline the first ever regular episode of WWF SmackDown all the way back in 99, The Rock challenged new WWF champion Triple H for the richest prize in the game. To energise the match even further, Shawn Michaels, who had retired due to injury 18 months earlier, was installed as the referee for the match. Wearing his classic way too short biker shorts and then teamed with a Shawn Michaels Training Academy t-shirt with the sleeves cut off and of course a telephone number on the back of the school, Michaels played it down the middle. That was until the very end of the match. When The Rock looked to have the WWF Championship won with a people's elbow, Shawn Michaels landed a very stiff super kick onto the side of The Rock's head. Michaels turned heel, aligned himself with his old D-Generation X teammates, and then wasn't seen again for nearly a year. But we will get back to that in a minute. So after the cameras shut off for the first ever regular episode of WWF SmackDown and all the performers got to the back, Dwayne Johnson went right to Shawn Michaels and told him right there he needed to lighten up. Michaels, who famously would pitch a fit, even threatened to have wrestlers fired if they were too stiff with him, like Vader for example, suddenly assumed once again the role of a grizzled, hard-nosed veteran. According to The Rock's father, Rocky Johnson, who Dwayne relayed the story to, Michaels sneered, "If you can't take it, you shouldn't be in this business." 15 years of pent-up anger toward the Hearkbreak Kid suddenly exploded, as Dwayne immediately dropped Michaels to the floor and started pummeling away before the one-sided fight was broken up. Now, the reason there was pent-up anger was because of something that happened 15 years earlier. Shawn Michaels was working for Dwayne's grandmother, Leah Maivia, and this was back in the Hawaiian wrestling territory, Polynesian Pro Wrestling. The future Rock witnessed Shawn acting disrespectfully to his grandmother, so he said, and Dwayne always had a low opinion of him ever since. When The Rock got to the WWF in 1996, Shawn was at pretty much his worst as far as backstage behaviour was concerned. Michaels, along with Triple H, specifically targeted Dwayne, who was working under the name Rocky Maivia at the time, in a bullying campaign that saw both men attempt to use their political sway to bury Dwayne's WWF career. Why? Well, it's because they saw him as a major threat. But back to the aftermath of The Rock vs Michaels kerfuffle. Michaels wouldn't be invited back to the WWF for a long time after, not causing the backstage fracas, but for complaining about Steve Austin not putting Triple H over clean at SummerSlam on the WWF's own online show, Bite This. The Michaels Triple H Alliance storyline was instantly dropped, and Michaels would not return to the WWF in a regular capacity until 2002. Also, the whole being an objectionable drug addict was wearing seriously thin on everybody in the locker room. And now we get to the fight that never was. Shawn Michaels versus Tommy Lee backstage at WrestleMania 19 for flirting with Pamela Anderson. The WWF had booked Pamela Anderson for a few appearances in early 1995. The winner of the WWF Royal Rumble match would not only go to WrestleMania 11 to face the WWF champion Diesel, aka Kevin Nash, but he would also be accompanied to the ring by Pamela Anderson. With 30 men participating in the Royal Rumble match, it could have been anyone. Mabel, Dick Murdoch, Quang, Doink the Clown. Thankfully, it was Shawn Michaels who, along with British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith, were the only two wrestlers out of the 30 in the match with any realistic prospect of winning. Anyway, Pamela posed with Michaels after his Rumble win, but kind of looked uncomfortable. Then, she didn't accompany Shawn Michaels to the ring as promised at WrestleMania 11. Pamela walked out with Diesel instead, and Shawn walked out with then model and later internationally renowned imbecile Jenny McCarthy. Now, the story went that this was because Shawn Michaels had been getting a little too close to Pamela when she and Tommy Lee were just starting to get their relationship going. Rumours abound that there was physicality backstage at WrestleMania 11, to Kevin Nash and Sid stepping in between the two to warn Tommy Lee off after getting into a heated argument. There was even a story planted by the WWF in down-market celeb and lifestyle news rag Star Magazine after the Royal Rumble pay-per-view to build interest in the WrestleMania pay-per-view a couple of months later. None of that happened as best we can tell. Anyway, Pamela Anderson wasn't actually disinterested during the Royal Rumble appearance because of Tommy Lee. I mean, she probably was disinterested, but this was a purposeful display. Or another rumour was that Anderson accompanied Diesel instead of the Hearkbreak Kid was due to Tommy Lee's influence. WWE producer Bruce Pritchard later revealed that Pamela Anderson was supposed to appear awkward at the Royal Rumble because Anderson was being forced to accompany the sleazy heel Shawn as he celebrated in the ring. That's why, come WrestleMania 11, Pam was booked to accompany the babyface Diesel to the ring instead of Shawn. Shawn was a heel, Pamela was a babyface, and no, Tommy Lee wasn't causing trouble backstage. And there you go, that's the list. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and comment and subscribe and all that kind of thing to help the channel grow, and we will see you for the next video.